If we were to continue making this Rails app the way we are now, we would need to have a separate page for every single one of our lists. And that's not really going to fly. That sort of defeats the purpose of having a Rails app in the first place. What we'd like to be able to do is instead of just having all of this hard coded in here, each list having its own page and then all the data written right in there, instead, what I'd like to do is just have sort of a template for a lists page and then have data automatically inserted into that template and then have that sort of filled out template shown to the user instead of having to create an HTML page for every single one. That's what we're going to do now. We're going to talk about how to get data into one of these HTML pages in here, how to turn it into a template. What I'm going to do is go into my lists controller, and we're going to do this in the index for now. I'm going to create a variable called @lists. Now you may remember that any variable beginning with @ is an instance variable. This has to be an instance variable right here, and I'll talk about why in a minute. So I'm just going to create some sort of dummy lists that we're going to make show up on the index page. Remember the index page, that's an index of lists. It's a list of lists. So I have this @list variable that is an array of 3 different strings right here. That's all I'm going to do there. Now I'm going to go to this index page, and I'm going to make all of those different things inside that @list variable show up on here. The way I'm going to do that is with these weird percent tags. I like to call these clown hats because if you turn your head sideways and look at them, it sort of looks like a goofy clown face wearing a hat. Then what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to do a little bit of Ruby code. All right, so notice this looks an awful lot like this Ruby right here. The only difference is I've taken each line of this chunk of Ruby and I've wrapped it inside these clown hats right here. You'll remember clown hats from this application.html.erb file that we talked about a couple of videos ago, where we saw all these different clown hats in here. They look a little bit different. We'll get to that later on. So this is called ERB. ERB stands for Embedded Ruby. It's a way of doing Ruby right in your HTML. So what I mean by that is, I'll come back to that in a second. If I do 3 times 3, then you see 9 right there. If I do 3 times 3 times 4, then you'll see 36 right there. So what's going on here is that before Ruby sends this page out to your users, it looks for all of these different clown hats and it evaluates all of the code inside the clown hats as Ruby. Then it replaces the clown hats with whatever the result of that Ruby was. You may have seen that there are 2 different kinds of clown hats, some with this equal sign and some without. Take a look at what happens if we don't have an equal sign right there. We don't see anything here anymore. If we put the equal sign back, then it shows up out here. So without the equal sign, it still evaluates this code, but it doesn't make anything show up on the page. So here's what I mean by that. If I say name equals Steve, we don't see anything show up on the page. But then if I do another clown hat, this time with an equal sign, suddenly Steve shows up. So any Ruby inside clown hats without an equal sign, that's evaluated. Any Ruby inside clown hats with an equal sign, it's evaluated and then it's printed out, whatever the result of that evaluation was. So one thing to keep in mind is that this can only be one line at a time. Clown hats can't span multiple lines. They can only be one line at a time, just like this. What I was doing before was this. @list each do list. I'm not putting clown hats here because I don't want to render this .each thing. Instead, what I want to render is something inside this. I'm going to do list, just like that. What I predict will happen is it's going to loop through all of these at lists, and then it's going to create a new list item tag for each one, inside of which will be the string for that thing in the list. And there we go. You can see that it's working just like that. You can put whatever HTML in here that you want. You can also put as much HTML as you want. So now we'll see hello for every single thing inside this lists array. So this is extremely valuable for showing collections of things on a web page, be that collections of products or users or really anything. It's always going to be just like this. Important thing to keep in mind is that the clown hats up here where you have each, they don't have an equal sign, but inside the each you do have an equal sign. If you put an equal sign up here, what you're going to see is this thing. It's going to print out this array right there. We don't want that. We just want it just like this. So there we go. So that's clown hats with and without equal signs. That's also embedded Ruby. So again, anything inside clown hats, that's Ruby code that's evaluated before this HTML gets sent to your users. The last thing I want to mention is this at thing. If we don't use at, then suddenly this doesn't work anymore. The only way it can access this list variable is if it's an instance variable. That is, it has to begin with at. Now, you don't have to have every variable in here begin with an at symbol. Not everything has to be an instance variable. I could do something like, well, here, I'll do name equals Steve, and then I'll say at message equals hi there, name. So here I have a local variable and an instance variable. Then I can come over here to my view and I can print out the message. So I got hi there, Steve, right here. So having a local variable in here, that's perfectly fine. Most of the variables in here should probably be local variables. The only things that'll be instance variables are the things that you want to show up in your page out here, the variables that you want to be passed directly to your view. Instance variables in a controller are available inside your view. Local variables in a controller, like name here, are not available inside your view. That's why lists is not just a local variable, it's at lists. It's an instance variable. And that shows up just like this. Lots of very important things covered in this step. I'm going to call this, and that's despite the fact that we only added, let's see, just a couple lines of code. That's it, just these guys. But it addresses a lot of really important concepts. I'm going to call this commit message passing list data from controller to view.